On September 25th, 2025, President Donald Trump looked straight into the cameras from the Oval Office and said, quote, "I will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. Nope, I will not allow it. It's not going to happen. There's been enough. It's time to stop now." End quote. Those words landed like a thunderclap across the Middle East. They weren't just politics. They weren't just geopolitics. They began to touch on Bible prophecy. Zechariah 2:8 declares, "For thus says the Lord of hosts, He sent me after glory to the nations which plunder you. For he who touches you touches the apple of his eye. For surely I will shake my hand against them, and they shall become spoil for their servants. Then you will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me." End quote. God calls Israel his pupil, the most sensitive part of the eye itself. To strike or restrain Israel's covenant inheritance is symbolically to poke the eye of God. Now, in the Bible, there is unconditional covenants and there is conditional covenants. Unconditional covenants, like the Abrahamic covenant, the Davidic covenant, have nothing to do with Israel's behavior, the righteousness of the people or the nation. It has everything to do with God's own name and his own plan for the nation of Israel. Conditional covenants, like the Mosaic covenants, are like if-then clauses. If you obey me, then you will be blessed. If you disobey me, then you will be cursed. That's found through the Torah in the writings of Moses, and then what we call the law and the 613 laws that are included there. Now, I couldn't help but notice the irony last night in the New York City election. Here is Trump, who's born and raised in New York City, which has been known as the Big Apple for forever. And if Israel is the apple of God's eye and New York City is the Big Apple, then the symbolism writes itself. The same man who once built towers and really built his empire there in New York City finds that that city is being handed over to the least competent, the most dangerous in terms of his political agendas, Muslim communist mayor in the history of New York City, and this is that guy Zohran Mamdani. And despite all of the polling internal to New York City, which showed Cuomo winning, or had the popular vote, and despite all of the baggage, with Zohran having been funded through all of these umbrella companies by George Soros and all of the things surrounding him, he won the election. So is that coincidence or is that consequence? Let's rewind back to 2020. I want to show kind of a pattern here. January 28th, Trump unveiled his Peace to Prosperity plan, permitting Israel to annex up to 30% of what the world calls the West Bank, but what is known as, in reality, is called Judea and Samaria. This is the heartland of Israel. It's like to the United States, it's like our Kansas, Nebraska, Indiana, Iowa, the breadbasket of our nation. This is the biblical heartland of Israel. And Prime Minister Netanyahu called that, back in January 28th of 2020, he called that a historic opportunity. But then what happened? By March, just not even 3 or 4 weeks later, COVID-19 had erupted, froze global movement, economy shut down, lockdowns began to happen, panic was ripe, and the markets collapsing, etc. And so the talks of annexation obviously were put on hold. And when they began to come back into conversation again as the world's dealing with the fallout from COVID-19, you had the next major crisis in the United States, which is May 25th, the death of George Floyd, and then the riots and the protests and the cities burning, all of that happening and taking place. And now the focus again is shifted to something else. And at the same time, your U.S. envoy at the time, Jared Kushner, began to quietly reassure Arab leaders that the talks of annexations would be paused. He said the focus now is normalization, not annexation. So at the time when America's attention is divided, when our cities are divided, our political, the polarization is an all-time high, the focus then became to keep Israel's land divided, right? So the Abraham Accords wasn't so much about dividing the land of Israel as it was keeping the land itself divided. And then you had, by July, Netanyahu once again began to prepare to declare sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. But then he got a bunch of pushback from Washington, from Europe, and from the Gulf states, warning that any annexation talks would kill Arab normalization. And then by August 13th, you had the Abraham Accords announced, and Trump proclaimed, quote, Israel has agreed to suspend declaring sovereignty and will now focus on expanding ties with other Arab nations, end quote. September 15th, they had the signing on the South Lawn there, signing ceremony there at the White House lawn, quote, peace in the Middle East, heralded while COVID deaths soared around the world to nearly 1 billion. So peace was achieved by postponing possession of the covenant land withheld, and peace granted. So weeks later, Trump would lose the 2020 election. It would not return to office for 4 years. And then during that time, he had all of these civil lawsuits against him. He had the FBI raiding his place in Mar-a-Lago. He had to run for president all over again, 2 assassination attempts, et cetera, et cetera. And this was the humbling process, I think, for Trump. And yet, as soon as Trump wins, again, God allows him to win because God appoints the leaders, as we see in Daniel 4:17, as well as in Acts 17:26. He sets the times and the boundary. He raises up leaders. He takes down leaders. So I think God had Trump come back into office for particular reasons. And as soon as he comes back into office, he's already inheriting a world that had fallen into a lot of chaos with Russia invading Ukraine, with the Hamas attacking Israel there on October 7th, 2023. So he's already walking into this whirlwind of this global chaos. And he begins to have these wins, small wins, and then big wins and bigger wins. And he's beginning to move the needle in the direction for the United States and for the American people. But then it comes back to the nation of Israel. They're winning. They're defeating all their enemies from without, all of those nations around their borders that had been threatening them for decades. But they still had to deal with these terrorist factions inside of their biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria, which they have not allowed to have full sovereignty over. And it's the irony to me is that you have the United States at the same time focusing on the enemies within the United States, these cartels, the Sinaloa cartels, Tren de Aragua, MS-13, who knows what Middle Eastern and Chinese and Russian terrorist factions have been let in through the southern border, through the porous borders of the Biden administration years. So he's dealing with those same issues that Israel has to deal with, but we're dealing with them, but we're not allowing Israel to deal with them. And this is not good. And so we saw what we saw last night. We saw with the election of Zoran Mandami. If Trump's not going to allow Israel to handle their issues internal, God is going to take the Big Apple. He's going to give it over to the least competent person on the planet to run that city into the ground. And so let me close with this. This is from the prophet Joel, in Joel 3:2. He warns, I will also gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there on account of my people, my heritage, Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and they have also divided up my land. So just because Trump is not dividing the land of Israel, he's also now allowing the divided land to be reunited. And I think there's consequences for that. So President Trump, whoever in your administration that watches this, I don't know who you're listening to in terms of geopolitics and dividing the land of Israel. Quit doing that. You're killing us here. You're going to destroy this nation. You're going to turn things sour politically. And we need to let Israel reclaim their biblical heartland, Judea and Samaria. Quit calling it the West Bank. It's not the West Bank of Israel. It's on the eastern side of Israel. They call it the West Bank because it's the West Bank of Jordan. The Arabs had their chance. The whole Land for Peace had its chance. It had 40 plus years to try and make it work. And we've seen that the enemies of Israel don't care about making peace with Israel. All they care about is destroying them and kicking them off the land. And that's all driven by spiritual forces, demonic forces, because they know what's coming. They know that Israel is the rebirth of Israel as a nation in 1948 is signaling the time of the end, and they do not want things to end because they know what their fate is. They know where they're headed, and they do not want to go there, and they're going to use whatever they can to prevent that from happening. So please, President Trump, please allow Israel to annex Judea and Samaria, their biblical heartland. Allow them to secure their borders, just like we're trying to secure our own borders. And whatever we do in terms of peace and trying to achieve peace, it should not come at the expense of the nation of Israel or the Jewish people. Thank you, and God bless you.